I'm very disappointed the way we are today. Whatever reason, we have not been good at designing effective information interfaces for people in a work environment. I think this has been massively undervalued. There's been not enough attention placed to it. Yes, there's something which we can improve massively. We can vastly improve on the extraordinarily crude information interfaces we have in work environments today. I think that's an extraordinary opportunity.
Welcome to the Work for Humans podcast. This is Dart Lindsley. Ross Dawson has a big goal. It's to advance human evolution. But he faced a dilemma. Humanity has found itself with information riches unimaginable to previous generations. But you can have too much of a good thing and it's become overwhelming. Disinformation's a problem for sure, but even when the information is accurate, there's too much of it. Ross set out to find out how humans can not just survive, but thrive amid this information overload, both as individuals and as institutions. Through his work, Ross became a globally recognized futurist, creating information strategies for companies like Microsoft, Coca-Cola, and Citibank. In this episode, Ross and I talk about his new book, Thriving on Overload, the information hazards we should avoid, and the future of humans and technology at work. We also discuss the skills everyone needs to succeed in the information age, the different ways we pay attention, and how all of this plays into our mental models at home and at work. If you enjoyed this episode, consider showing your support by subscribing to Work for Humans, wherever you listen to podcasts. And now, without further ado, my conversation with Ross Dawson. Ross Dawson, welcome to Work for Humans.
Wonderful to be talking to you, Dad.
There's an enormous amount of information out there right now, more than I think we've ever seen. And this show is largely about work, but let's start in general. Is all this information that we're getting, this overload, is it a bug or is it a feature?
It's something we've created. Humans create, we invent, we make new things, we progress the world. We've got all sorts of things we didn't have before. We build on others' achievements, and that's partly through information. And one of the things that we have wrought through all of our inventions is lots and lots and lots of information. And we are all infophiles. We are all, as humans, attracted to novelty, to new ideas, to things that we can learn from and build on. That's the nature of what it is to be human. But we have created so much that it is a challenge for our finite cognition to deal with the essentially infinite amount of information that we have. So it is a resource. It is an incredible time to be alive because we have more available to us than ever before to learn from, to build on, to create, to achieve what it is that we want. Yet the nature of not just the availability of the information, but also the way that is pushed to us means that a lot of the nature of our cognition is drawn to things that do not necessarily serve us. So our brains, I suppose, have propensities which can mislead us, and we do need to be aware of in order to be able to transcend so that all of this plenitude of information can be a resource, something that we use as opposed to something that misleads us or distracts us or puts us into negative frames of mind or all sorts of other negative directions.
In cryptography, there's two ways to hide data. One way is to have so much spam data that you can't find the real data. It's almost like there's so much information out there right now that finding the signal in the noise is really hard.
It is. We have had an increase in signal. We have more valuable information than ever before. But the ratio in terms of that information which has zero or negative value, as in that it takes our attention with creating no value or even destroying it by misleading, that it is harder and harder to be able to pick that out. There are technological tools. And to some degree, the solution isn't the problem, as we have tools to filter, but they are at very best simply tools to assist us. The thing which still surprises me, because I've been looking at this for over 25 years, is that the degree to which we have not looked at human cognition as the critical element of how do we enhance our human cognition, certainly assisted by technology, but essentially enable us better to process unlimited information to create what it is we want. These are the capabilities. These are the fundamental capabilities for success in any endeavor today.
And what are some of those capabilities?
In my book, Thriving on Overload, I point to what I describe as the 5 powers, being purpose, framing, filtering, attention, and synthesis. And essentially, we need to know purpose is why it is that we want information at all in the first place. Framing is building the frameworks that pull together all of those disparate information into something that is useful, a foundation of knowledge. The filtering and to be able to assess what information serves us and what doesn't. The attention to be able to put our awareness to where it is useful in structured ways, and synthesis to pull that together to understanding, making sense, and the ability to act more effectively.
I want to go through each of those. And I want to start with purpose, because I'm not sure I know the purpose of the information that I consume, other than maybe dopamine. I feel like I'm not sure I have a purpose. What are my options for purpose if I had a drop-down list?
Purpose is a dangerous word because we're all exhorted at every turn, find your purpose. And that is at best a lifelong journey. I think there's a handful of people say, I know what my purpose is, and that's great. But it is a journey for most of us. So I think of it in terms of having a placeholder. What is it that I want to achieve? What is it that I might want to achieve? What impact do I want to have? What are some of the bigger frames for my life? But also thinking about in terms of your relationship with information. So we have a relationship with information as we do with, for example, money and food. So we can have a positive or a destructive relationship with money. We can have a positive or a not so positive relationship with food. And exactly the same with information. And across different domains, we need to say, well, what relationship with information enables me? Which is where we're not snacking or getting info obese or just gorging on things which are not serving us, but in fact having the propensity to choose the information that is nutritious, that serves us, that makes us weller. That relationship with information is defined around some domains, and one of them is our areas of expertise. So we do need to have some kind of idea of what our area of expertise is, what we want it to become, where we are distinctive in a global connected world where there's extraordinary talent everywhere. We do need to have some facets of where we choose our expertise. Again, that is a journey. Of course, that will evolve over time, and we are interested in other things, but I think we need to get, firstly, some definition around where it is that I develop my expertise, thinking through that, having some clarity, writing that down in order to inform our information explorations around our ventures. And those ventures could be a startup, it could be a project, it could be a community initiative, or it could even be sort of a adventure holiday. These are, again, a venture, something I want to achieve. This is the information which will serve me in that. We can think about information relating to our health and our well-being. What information is going to help me to be healthier, to know what to eat, how to exercise, how to sleep better? What is it that serves me there? Thinking about our relationship to information with our identity, which comes back to more this classic idea of purpose, where we say, well, who am I? Who am I becoming? What do I want to be? And so this guides the information we look for. And as we find that information, that helps us understand better who we are, what inspires us, what intrigues us, what fascinates us. And we are discovering that and feeding that back into ourselves. So these are all part of a journey. It's not a static purpose. It is all part of how do I build a positive relationship to information where I understand better and better over time what information serves me, makes me better, makes me feel better, makes me better able to achieve in my job, in my work, in my career, and what is it that is outside that, which is a distraction at best.
A lot, not everything you just mentioned, is about utility, the information I can use. But I'll tell you, so much information is ugly. And even though it's useful, it is not beautiful. And that's partially because it's very hard to create beautiful information. It's very hard to make a poem. It's very hard to write a truly beautiful novel. And one of the things I think that's gotten hidden in all of the utilitarian and less utilitarian information is beautiful information. And in fact, the books on my shelves, these are the books that my wife doesn't allow in the house. And I don't want them in the house either. They're useful, but I'm in the garage. I don't keep them in the house because they're not beautiful in most cases. There's some exceptions. Christopher Alexander up there, oh, he's beautiful. So I'm curious, how do you articulate your own purpose? What's your top purpose for information, would you say?
My broader purpose is to assist human evolution, which sounds fairly bold, but I think that is a critical issue today. We humans are a product of our history, and partly through evolving to the state of society, but now we are in a very different environment, and we are literally becoming different. We are the key question. I mean, our primary role is as a futurist, and the primary question as a futurist is, who are we becoming? Who do we want to become? And so my frame around information, around the information that's useful to me or relevant to me, is thinking about this broad question. Is there anything I can understand or contribute or share which will enable us individually and collectively to be better, to be able to be more than we are today?
Which is interesting because Doug Engelbart, who so much information has come to us through his invention of, I believe, hypertext and the mouse and the graphical user interface and a whole bunch of different things. His purpose was human advancement. I'm not sure it was evolution, but it seems like this might be continuous with his work.
Absolutely. I was very blessed to meet Doug in his last years, and his vision and his work is, I think, completely aligned. There's another phrase around this is human augmentation. I believe that's just part of that. Technology can augment humans, but again, this comes back to this part of technology can assist us. We will, I believe, inevitably integrate, or to whatever degree, is where we cannot necessarily discern the boundaries of what is human and what is technology. But the broader frame for me is, who do we become? And this work around thriving on overload is also leading to this: how do we evolve our cognition? That is what it is to be human. Is our cognition is taking information from the environment and applying it to everything from lighting a fire and finding the food for the day, through to designing algorithms which can support our company's work. We are cognitive beings. We are information processing animals. And that part of our evolution has been able to advance that. So I think that's a very present thing for anybody in a job. And if we're thinking about humans at work, then it is around, yes, we can support them with technology. We can create organizational structures that bring these intelligence together. But we do also need to emphasize the individual cognition and how it is we can advance that. So coming back to, I suppose, my purpose, there is a pretty broad frame around it, but I think it is something which we can pull back to, things which are very relevant in the present.
So I want to talk about framing, because I really recognize the importance of framing to ingesting information. I can feel myself placing information into a frame. The risk is picking the wrong frame. How do you curate your frames?
That's a great question. And that's something which I do address in that book, this idea of the frame, just as the way as a photographer, the art is to be able to choose what goes in the frame and what goes outside the frame. And that is an art. It's not a science. And that just has to be something which we can evolve. And again, I think we all should have multiple frames or frameworks that we are building, which will all be related in some way as well. So in the exercise in my book, one of the key things is to be able to start, well, what are the frames that you choose? This usually starts from area of expertise. This is something where I want to know more, where it'll be useful to know more, where it serves my career, whatever it may be. And so identifying what it is I want to know more about, understanding what we already have developed, and be able to keep on the edge of change where there are already new developments because I have a framework. And from that enables me to perceive what is relevant, what fits in, how it changes my framework or adds to it and complements and sensitizes me to the information that's relevant. So a short answer is that whatever your frame is, whatever the boundaries of that frame that you choose to address, that will need to evolve. And you might perceive, well, one of the limitations of this is, in fact, there's something else I need to include here, or I need to drill in more specifically into this domain because otherwise I'll get drowned in everything around this space. So that's part of this art. But again, as in the case of the purpose, we have a placeholder. Okay, well, I don't know what my purpose is, but I think it might be this. And that means we can start to find information which supports the purpose, which helps us evolve the purpose. And the same thing with the framing. We choose, well, this is a placeholder for what this frame, which is going to be useful to my career or work or employer might be, or my own areas of fascination. And then that allows you to evolve that as you get new information, putting in the places, being able to then extend or to refocus or reframe. And that is part of, a really important part of that journey of framing.
It seems to me, at least the way I first initially understood framing, that it might also mean frame I use to not just decide what's going to be in my field of view, but to decide how I'm going to interpret what comes into my field of view and fit it into a mental model that gives it meaning. And so trying to think of an example of that. Well, an example is a lot of this show is about, what happens when you frame employees differently instead of as an input to production as a customer who's buying a product, which is work. Well, the old frame is incredibly compelling. And the old frame makes it so that every time you look at a person, you look at them for their utility. And so the way that you interpret information is based upon how you've framed that person in that role. So it's just like one example that comes off the top of my head. And we are not conscious. I think there's an enormous value to becoming conscious of the frames we use to interpret the meaning of the information that we get.
Absolutely right. And I think a parallel example to the one you use is around data, and where most data analysts, engineers, leaders come to saying, how can I use data to extract value from my customers? The reframe is, how can I use data to create value for my customers? And that becomes a completely different interpreting frame, and one which I think generally leads to better outcomes. So again, I've talked about the purpose, writing that down. Again, that frame, simply writing that down. If you write down, this is my frame, and then you can potentially recognize some of the assumptions underlying that, or rephrase that, or reframe that. And so what is the, again, that purpose? What is the purpose of data? Well, to create value for me or to create value for someone else? Or what is the value of humans? To put them to work or to create a more prosperous society, which includes this organization? These are valuable, very valuable ways of reframing, which we can only get to by actually working out what our implicit frame is at the start.
That's right. I had Fred Reichheld on the show, and he's the person who invented Net Promoter Score and was behind customer loyalty. And he recently wrote a book called Winning on Purpose. He would completely agree with you that the right way to frame information, for instance, is how can I help my customer, as opposed to how can I get more out. And that is a deep framing, deep in your psyche. I want to skip all the way to synthesis on your list, because I could go forever on synthesis. What does it mean to you, and how does it help us with information overload?
I see synthesis as the ultimate human capability. And we say, what is the magic in humans? I see that as synthesis, where it is the ability, the one classic phrase, connecting the dots. It's been able to take not just, an array of data, but everything we have experienced in our entire life, and to see how that forms a whole. And this is this is done in, well, perhaps not in small ways, but for example, Nobel Prize winners have classically both eloquently shared, or you can observe the ways in which they have brought together different things from different domains and different frames or perspectives and brought them together to create something new. All innovation is essentially taking together what already exists and pulling that into something new. And that is the nature of human progress, is building on what we've already had and to see another perspective or connecting that with something else to be able to create something else. So it is our want, it is what our brains do implicitly. And what comes from this is essentially everything which is of value in people and working in organizations, as in the ability to make judgments, to be able to see that this opportunity is something that is worth pursuing, to be able to make effective decisions, to be able to reconsider within broader frames, to be able to see the system as a whole. And that is the magic and the beauty of humans. And if we think about, well, what is it that distinguishes AI and where we think AI will get to and humans? And I've often in the past pointed to three domains: expertise, creativity, and relationships. But in a way, synthesis brings all those together. And synthesis is not just being able to see all of the areas of expertise, the things that we know, the creativity to connect those in novel and unexpected ways, but also the relationships, the relationships with the humans, which is around connecting the ideas, connecting the people, and being able to convey this to a broader domain. So this is something that we can nurture. And I think that our society, particularly our educational system, focuses on analysis. Analysis is the breaking things down into pieces. We have been trained, we have been educated in almost all of our educational structures to break things down into pieces, into smaller and smaller parts. What has been underemphasized in our education, and I think largely in organizational structures and business process reengineering and all of these wonderful things, is that's the focus is on analysis, and it has taken away and has not nurtured our capacity for synthesis. So one critical distinction here is that analysis can crudely be correlated to the conscious mind. Synthesis can be crudely correlated to the unconscious mind. And so this is not something where we can put our rules and our structures and our processes on. It is something that we need to nurture. It is something that we need to create the conditions for it to emerge by itself.
Is it a neighbor to an analogic or metaphorical thinking?
It is exactly a neighbor in the sense that synthesis is pulling together pieces into a holistic frame. And one of the tools or supporting structures is to be able to see the similarities between two different situations or models or structures. So in every case, there are some elements that are common and there are some that are different. But seeing those commonalities is an aid to our understanding. Another frame around this is mental models. I mean, I have probably a broader view of mental models than the way that is most generally described in the literature. Commonly, a mental model is a heuristic. All right, here's a simple mental model about how to make a decision. My view of mental models is that they comprise our interpretation of everything we've experienced in our entire life. So our response in a conversation, our decision, is not a reflection of, I think it's better to do something which will use some particular heuristic. It is implicitly based on all of our experience, and that is the depth, one which we can never access consciously. So our mental models are either useful or not useful. And so we need to be nurturing our mental models. And one of the ways in which we build our models, one of those elements of those mental models is analogical thinking, where, this situation is akin to that situation. And these are implicit in our thinking, but sometimes those can be very useful to us. Again, we need to be careful with analogies because they always have some elements of truth and some which are not true, because these are different things which we are building analogies to. So we need to treat those with caution, but they can be useful if applied judiciously as part of our mental models to making a decision.
So now I want to make this a design question. I'm going to ask it about work, because that's what this show is about. And maybe it's not our responsibility, but let's say at work, how can I design an information environment for others that is going to nurture as opposed to overwhelm? And maybe it's not my job. Maybe it's your job to do what you want with the information. But let me ask that question first, which is, can I design an information environment for you at work that is going to be helpful?
The short answer is yes. And I think that the most important thing to say is that I'm very disappointed the way we are today. There is so little attention, or we have whatever reason, we have not been good at designing effective information interfaces for people in a work environment. I think this has been massively undervalued. There's been not enough attention placed to it. Yes, there's something which we can improve massively on where we are today. And to your point, yes, it'll have to be highly individualized. There's no single information interface which is going to be relevant to everyone. So, for example, I've had a long and deep interest in three-dimensional information interfaces, where there are particular information contexts where 3 dimensions can be enormously valuable in being able to understand information. Yet that is not how everyone's brain works. Not everybody has this spatial cognition, which means that will be useful to them. So in some cases, for some people, in some contexts, that could be extraordinarily valuable. In others, it won't be. That's just one example of how we might have differences in information interfaces. But the answer is yes, we can vastly improve on the I would say extraordinarily crude information interfaces we have in work environments today. I think that's an extraordinary opportunity.
What would they look like? We can design them for you in this case, but in an ideal case.
I recently launched a startup where its journey is to be able to do more of this, and we're still early on in being able to play with some of these possibilities. For me, certainly highly visual, where we can start and where we really get concepts. I talk in write in my book around concept visualization. So when we talk about framing, these are around ideas. The information is coalesced around these concepts or ideas and the relationships between ideas. So I think in many cases we're needed to distill, and this is one of the ways in which the current generation of AI can be extraordinarily helpful in being able to take broader information, to be able to distill concepts from that, and to be able to represent relationships between those. And that is something where I can start to very easily, which could include gestures or even eye gaze or other advanced interfaces, to be able to explore connections between different ideas. And you can sort of readily go deeper in different domains when you see a particular concept you like to move into, or pull back to see the whole. So you can go in varying degrees of depth. And that's one of the classic issues around frames and framing as well. How deep do you go? And being able to be always clear around what level or meta level you are working at. So these are some of the facets. But certainly for me, and I think and certainly for a majority of people, visual interfaces, which you can explore, are, I think, a fundamental part of that solution.
That's what I would want from a metaverse. What I would want from a metaverse is not someplace I can go shop and do everything I can do in real life. I would want an informationscape where I could walk around and, in fact, I used to do this when there were libraries. I was very lucky. When I was growing up, I grew up between 1 mile away from the beach and 1 mile away from UCSD. And UCSD had this magnificent library. And so I used to go in there in middle school even, and I would follow bibliographies essentially and just burrow in on some topic and find the references. Like if I could have that space, I mean, honestly, even if you could walk around in a space and see academic papers and their reference, their cited papers, and then you could see the note of those cited papers and what they went to, oh my goodness, that would be great.
Absolutely. And there's a few people have been playing with related ideas, but nobody's really executed that. Just to your point around the information scape, I had a product which, long story, didn't actually come to market, but was called Thoughtscape, and which included three-dimensional mind maps that you could fly through. So you could create your own Thoughtscape of your ideas and the way their relationships and be able to be inside that space. But I think it just comes back to that question you posed. Can we build better interfaces? Absolutely. And that's, I think, a deep failing of building work for humans is this mismatch between the information architectures of our organizations and the cognitive architectures of the humans which are involved with them. And, for a very long time, my focus has been on the interfaces. That includes, of course, the mouse and the keyboard and the screen, and now, virtual reality, as I mentioned, things like eye gaze tracking or gesture control, and to whatever degree thought interfaces are part of that journey. But it is also around the presentation of that information that is cognitively tractable, that our limited human cognitions can work with, but apply. It's still, I do not see a point where we'll be able to match the capabilities of synthesis of the human brain.
You mentioned 6 attention modes to be conscious of. What are those and what are they useful for?
The most important thing to understand is that it's not either we have attention or we don't have attention. That there are different modes of attention when we're dealing with information. And they are all distinct. And I think that's one of the most useful lessons we need to understand, that we need to have particular attention modes in dealing with information, and we need to carve out time for each of those. So the most obvious one, which we all engage with, is scanning, where usually we have a common set of sources where daily or regularly we say, oh, I will look at particular sources of information. I will scan that quickly and possibly just say, all right, I'm kind of familiar with what's happening in the world or my domain. And you may have identified some things where you want to spend some more time with. So which brings us to the next mode, which is assimilating. So this is a quite different mode. Scanning, you're just going across the surface. It's very efficient. Just say, all right, up to date. And that's something which I want to spend a bit more time on. That goes into assimilating, where you said, I've scanned across the surface. I found something I want to go a bit deeper. And then this is a mode where you have dedicated attention. You are then assimilating it, which means you are bringing that into your mental models. You are finding the points where it fits into your frameworks and can evolve or develop those. We have searching, and this is a distinct mode where we say, all right, I'm looking for information on a particular topic or domain. This is the avenues I will choose. I will carve this out as a specific period. I will search for that, and that I might find, again, some things I might spend some more time with. I think one of the classically underutilized modes is exploring. Now, for some people, all right, that's scanning through your social media feeds. That's kind of exploring. But that's very superficial. That's not exploring in the sense where I mean it, where it is you are actively trying to find things you would never normally find. So using a starting point, as in an intriguing person, you go off and explore and think references they give, or you find a different user search term you wouldn't normally think of and find some particular directions, and you trying to always go in directions you wouldn't go. And this can be fun, of course. And you're trying to maximize the serendipity. Yeah, you might just find things which are interesting and you're following your fascination. You're obviously not going down any things which aren't interesting to you, that you're following, the edges of your fascination to find. And quite likely find some things that actually are germane to your core interests. The fifth domain is deep diving. And this is this idea of carving out time which is exclusively dedicated to one cognitive task. So there's no notifications, there's no alerts, you're not going to be interrupted. Everybody should have a minimum of 90 minutes carved out once a week. And I think for many people, it should be a lot more. But I think, there's nobody that shouldn't have 90 minutes carved out at some point for, say, there are no interruptions. I'm not going to look at my email or my phone is out of the room and I will just do one thing. And that is not just something where you will achieve an enormous amount, but where you are honing your ability to be focused, to do one thing for an extended period of time, which I would say a significant proportion of us have got out of the habit of doing. And the sixth one, and in some ways the most important, is regenerating, because our attention does get depleted. There's a deep body of research demonstrating that. I think we all experience the end of a demanding cognitive day. We're tired. We're not able to do difficult cognitive tasks anymore. So the regenerating is not watching streaming shows. That's not something which, it rests us. It doesn't regenerate us. So regenerating us almost always is in the context of nature, or maybe a bath, or something which is truly taking us out of information of any kind, and one where we can do that. And so the Kaplans who studied what they call attention restoration therapy talked about soft fascination. And I think a classic example of that is looking at the leaves blowing in a tree. You can't focus on it, but you can watch it and you can see the trees moving, or you can see the clouds moving. I mean, you could be in the middle of a city, just need to look up and watch the clouds moving. That is something where there's nothing particularly to focus on, but you can watch it and your thoughts can wander. That's fine. And this is part of the practice of regenerating your attention. So we need to carve out a block of time each day for scanning. We should have time blocked out for assimilating. We should have some time blocked out regularly for deep diving. We absolutely need to block out time for regenerating. And this can be extraordinarily valuable in recognizing these different attention modes and being able to build a structure where we have place for these, in ensuring that we have a positive relationship to information. All of doing these well means that we don't continue to just go through these superficial feeling that I've got lots of information, but not actually things that support our purpose.
What is interesting to me about this is that it's like, I think of sailors need to know knots, and mountain men need to know how to skin animals and how to set a trap. And it feels to me like this is the environment that we live in today, and we haven't learned how to tie the basic knots. First of all, it's information. So it's not something that we're going to manipulate with our hands necessarily. It's going to be something that we manipulate with our minds. And so we need to be able to tie those knots. And you mentioned in the book Zen and its relationship to information. Can you expand on that?
I've had a lifelong fascination with Zen, which is part of what took me to live in Japan for a while, and where I lived in a Zen dojo for a year while I was working as a financial journalist. And Zazen, which is Zen meditation, is really the heart of what Zen is. It is the space of being there. And one of its characteristics relative to other forms of meditation is you do it with your eyes open. So it's not you are closing yourself up to the world. You are open to the world. You are seeing the world. If there is a fly buzzing around, you experience that. You're not trying to block that out. You are alive. You are present. You have that. And that arguably is information. There are sounds. The world is going on. You are experiencing that. You are there. And, my Zen master, actually, I was looking back at an article, where he's interviewed. He expresses of being able to perceive what is relevant. You are in that place of balance where you can perceive what is relevant to you and what isn't. And we are off balance. Our life today pushes us off balance in all kinds of ways. And I think Zen, amongst other things, helps us come back to this point of balance, this equipoise, where we are in a space where we can perceive what is far better, what is useful to us and what is not useful to us. And we are aware of the world. We are not closing off the world. We are seeing it, and we are experiencing that in ways that come into us and usefully shape our frame on the world.
It occurs to me that there might be another mode of attention, which is the mode where you are looking at patterns of information, not the information itself, but the recurring themes, for instance, that appear in the news. And that might actually, I don't know anything about Zen, but it might actually lend itself to that, which is let's experience the whole pattern as opposed to the individual bits.
Absolutely. And the way I frame that is, first of all, in the framing chapter of the book and the idea around framing, and saying this is around being able to generate patterns. So the best way to perceive patterns, to recognize patterns, is actually not do that necessarily just unconsciously, but to actually be clear on what the patterns are, to clear that do that. But the synthesis is, as I've described, a state of mind. So that's arguably an attention mode. And when you're in that synthesis, you are getting to the state of mind where the pieces come together, where you can see the connections, where the recurring patterns come. And so in the book, I describe a number of practices that we can use to be able to get into that state of mind, to nurture that capacity for seeing the trends, seeing the patterns, see the things that are recurring, being able to perceive how that might play out and what it is that we can do to take advantage of those.
Where do people play into this? The reason I ask is you're aware of this one group, maybe you're a member of this group too, which is Next Now, which is a collection of people who share interests in, well, it actually spun off of Doug Engelbart, didn't it? I think it originally started from Doug Engelbart. But there are other groups that I'm members of where you're essentially curating a population of people who themselves are synthesizing information. And in the same way that there's distributed cognition, there is distributed information gathering among a group of people. And so where does that play in?
That's a wonderful topic. So this does hark back to my second book a very long time ago, Living Networks, describing this idea of the networks of people and technology and the ways those are coming to life in what we can think of as a global brain. And so my frame is collective intelligence. How do we ensure that we are collectively more intelligent than we are individually, as opposed to the opposite, which is usually true? And I think we are relatively early on in that journey. There is the MIT Center for Collective Intelligence, being, I think, established at least 15 years ago. And they do some really good work in being able to provide some frameworks and structures for how it is we can build collective intelligence. But again, this is part of what I'm working with in my new startup, is ways in which we can use distributed information gathering inside teams. How it is we can, amongst a team, whereas rather than everybody looking for the same information and processing the same way, where we can allocate tasks, or be that as a planned, distributed effort to make sure that you are covering relevant information sources, be able to share that, and have an element of collective cognition, and which is, again, critical in terms of your alignment of mental models. And this is, of course, most obviously pertinent for executive teams, where you need to build alignment of mental models. And the only way to really do that is to make those mental models explicit rather than implicit. But for any functional team, anything which can make those mental models more aligned, which is part of that way of, as you described, distributed cognition, is extraordinarily valuable.
That's actually a meeting I'm running in January. There's a new team of executives that have been formed, and they do not share a mental model, especially a mental model about how they connect to each other. And so my current idea is to gather from them everything that I can about those connections and then draw it on the floor and have them stand there in their spot and talk about the connectedness. I did this once with a bunch of people around our table, and I asked them to talk about their relationships to each other in their business and throw the yarn ball back to it and forth to each other and wrap it around. It was very interesting to see. But there's a curation. I mean, that thing I was just talking about is when you get thrown together with a bunch of people and you don't share a mental model. But there's this other thing that goes on, which is a curation of the people. So I ask people, and I will ask you this at the end of this interview, which is, what do you hire your job to do for you? When I ask people that question, one thing people very often say is, I hire my job to surround me with people with a certain mindset, intelligent people, feeling people. They're trying to get themselves into a network. They're trying to curate who they're around. And so there's something there that might actually be a design of work question, which is, can I create a population of people, a concentration of people in a company that attracts people for the purpose of information sharing?
Yes. Also, we do need to recognize how critical cognitive diversity is. So there's this balancing act.
Right, not sameness. In fact, I really think that's right. I think that you should be looking for a place where people think differently.
Absolutely. So, cognitive diversity is, I think we can agree that that's fundamental to any success. But then the issue then is, as you suggest, around that ability to share. So if the cognitive models are too disparate, sometimes there's not the ability to find that middle ground or the ability to communicate around that. But I think that anybody that has the true curiosity and the fascination and the desire to build expertise will be looking for complementary, different perspectives. And they'll value that cognitive diversity in that perspective. So I think, in a way, the critical element is finding those who are actively looking for the different perspectives and those who will complement their perspectives. But I think you can, map out. I mean, it always has to be somewhat emergent, but map out, the cognitively diverse team, which have that intent of together moving towards deeper understanding, and then be able to design, I suppose, the different facets. You can imagine a topic or a domain. You're charging people to have cameras from different angles or perspectives, and each of those frames can bring light to the whole.
Are there information hazards that we need to have an immune system for?
Well, the most obvious one is simply distractions from the trivial, where our brains do have a propensity for the novel. We do want to look for the new, look for the updates too. And it's not just that our brains are trained for that, but we have many companies with billions of dollars that are doing their very best to capture our attention, and using some wonderfully advanced technologies to be able to do so. So we are deer in the headlights in a way. We're all fodder for the attention wars, and our brains are not geared for that. So yes, the default is our attention just continues to go for things which are at best not useful and more often destructive to our emotional state of mind, to our perspective on the world, to the efficacy of our mental models, and so on. And so this is something where we need to train ourselves. And that's where attention practices are critical. And this comes back to, of course, our ability to focus for extended periods. It is around habit switching. It is an extraordinarily compelling and common habit to pick up a phone and check what the alerts have come up. And so we need to be able to switch from that habit to other habits. Or if we do pick up a phone, that we say, all right, well, instead of checking my social media stream, I will go to something which I'm wanting to read and where I can just read for a minute or two and I can continue later. So it's around working out what are our current habits, what are better habits. So habit switching, enhancing our capacity for focus. These are all just table stakes, really, in our ability to be at choice in a world which is endeavoring to capture our attention at every turn.
That's a new framing for me, by the way. And in fact, the title of your book is Thriving in Overload. The truth is, it is overload, but it's not just noise. It's predatory. I don't really mean predatory, but what I mean is it's an assault in the same way that a virus is an assault and your immune system has to deal with it. This is not a completely benign overwhelm like a gale of wind. It wants something, and that is your attention. So this is actually more than just knowing how to tie a knot on a boat. It's knowing how to keep a bear from eating you if you're a mountain man, right? It's a little bit more competitive than I thought at the beginning of the conversation.
It is. We live in a world where our attention is what is up for grabs. It's become a larger and larger portion of the economy, essentially our attention, and arguably will continue to get so. There's so much investment going into capturing that. And, what I describe as attention hijacking is an industry where every new iteration of social media, which sort of pushes away the ones in the past, shows they've got it better than the last ones. And that will continue to get better. That's where the classic line of Jeff Hammerbacher, a former data scientist, chief of data science at Facebook, who said the best minds of our generation spending all their effort trying to capture our attention, that sucks. And that's just so true. That's where the salaries are. Get the incredibly bright minds. All they're trying to do is to capture our attention. And so we need to be, it's not necessarily fighting against. Again, we need to have our defenses. And that's, in a way, comes out of that Zen. We are present. We are at balance. We are not off balance. They are trying to pull us off balance. If we're in a state of balance, we don't get pulled to that. So we just need to have those ramparts, those defenses, to be where we want to be, as opposed to be where someone else wants us to be.
Yeah, I heard a framing of companies that there are companies that are time takers and there are companies that are time givers. And the time takers necessarily compete with each other because you only have so much time. But the time givers are less in competition because the more time they give you, the more time you have, right? And so it's different businesses. Facebook is a time taker, for instance, and there are a lot of them. And it occurs to me, as we're talking about this, that I have become a time taker because I spam the world with my podcast now.
But the distinction there is between positive value information and negative value information. And I think it's critical to understand that information cannot have just zero value, but negative value. And that is where the value of the information you consume is less than the time you invest in consuming it. So in most cases, the value of the information is less than the time you spend it, or, of course, in many cases, even far worse because it actually misleads you or makes you depressed or whatever it may be. So it is a pretty high bar, given the value of time and our attention and short lifespans and all that. The value of attention is very high. But if you do give enough value for content, whether it be that written or video or podcast, whatever they be, then it is positive value information. It is worth people's investment.
Yeah, and there's a sense in which a good podcast is creating the kind of network of minds that's very valuable, right? If you can curate the people that come onto the show in such a way that they enrich each other in a conversation, it's an asynchronous conversation, but it's still a conversation. And so, yeah, I can see that. Okay, good. I can still live with myself after this. Are there any other questions you'd like me to ask?
Going beyond the book Thriving on Overload, I see a frame for designing work where humans and technology are complementary. And this goes beyond simply the information issues to the evolving edge of what technology, AI, automation is capable of, and what humans are best at. And so this is where this frame for work for humans is one where we are designing a world where there is the potential for humans to fully express their potential, ultimately. And I think there was a wonderful survey done by Pew Research, quite some time ago, but they asked 2,000 or so experts on the future of work. Essentially, the question was, well, what do you expect over the next 10, 20 years for the future of work? And, the ultimate question was, do you believe that we will be better off in the future of work, or will be worse off? And I think the summary was 52% thought we'd have a positive future of work and 48% would have a negative future of work. And of course, the negative future of works were often dire, as in massive technological unemployment, just incredible disparities in income, just really terrible outcomes. And the positive ones were very, at their best, very positive. And for what we can envisage for a future of work that is positive is truly ones where humans are made more humans through technology because we focus on what it is that is most distinctive about us, what it is we are best at. And that as such, we can create a future of work and create organizations which don't just put people in boxes for particular job roles with very defined job descriptions, but where we are able to tap the fullest possibilities of those individuals to contribute to the organization in ways which they might understand through their educational qualifications or their testing or their training, and ways in which even those individuals don't understand themselves, because that is brought to bear and they're able to express their full potential. And so I think that organizational leaders mostly, and to some degree, government leaders and others, are currently shaping the future of work. And we cannot know. Both of those futures of work are possible. We could have a very dire future of work. We could have an extraordinary positive future of work. And to design that positive future of work now is to be able to see that and to design organizations for that so that we can recognize the role of technology as something that can complement and support the fullest capabilities of humans and this ability to express them. So I think that as we are all literally shaping the future of work every day in what we do. And I love the framework for humans. And I think this is absolutely critical for us to have clarity around the vision for the future organizations that will be successful in the world and how they will use humans complemented by, augmented by technology in a system where they can come together to create value. And we are still early in that journey of truly envisaging what that looks like and putting the steps in place to be able to create that. So that is a fundamental part of my work. The Thriving on Overload, I believe, is a critical element to that, in those underlying capabilities for humans to succeed in a world of overload. But it is also around how they would put those together to be able to create that system of humans plus technology to create the organizations of the future.
I ask a question at the end of every show, and I didn't prepare you for this. So it's, what job do you hire your job to do for you?
To learn, to push my learning. And that's, well, two things. One is to push my learning and to push my ability to have a positive impact. And so that's the role of my job, is to benefit me by learning and experiencing and being able to continue to be at the edge and to discover what I'm most fascinated in, but also to enable me to have that positive impact, as I earlier described. It's that very grand, I suppose, vision of contributing in whatever way to human evolution. And that's what my job is asking me to do. Or it's both asking of me, but also giving to me.
And it seems like a special kind of learning in your case. And I'm going to guess here. Some kind of learning is learning from other sources, but some kind of learning is the kind of learning where you have to invent the knowledge. Is it both?
Absolutely. And not uneducated, but I am still largely an autodidact. I have taught myself everything from music, instruments, through to much of what I know. And it is knowledge creation. I do look to, of course, try to build on and learn from what other people have built. But I'm always trying to find my own frame or my own interpretation or my own ideas. And, there's some things which are so compelling that you have to share with other people. But I'm always trying to find my own frame, to invent that for myself, to be essentially an independent thinker. If I didn't, then I wouldn't have a job. I wouldn't be able to make a living. And it is my ability to have, at least somewhat novel perspectives or distinctive perspectives that enables me to create value in my work. And that's where, the learning is the creating of knowledge. It is the making the connections. It is that learning for myself and then hopefully having something which is sufficiently valuable to be able to share with others.
And what does your work cost you?
It is very demanding in terms of consistency of work. I'm just about to enter, as we approach Christmas, New Year, space of more space, mental space and emotional space than I've had for a long time. And I do need it. I think I'm focusing pretty much on the right things in my life, but it is focus. I do have blinkers on. It's impossible to be in a job and not have blinkers on, just the way the horses had blinkers on so they didn't get distracted from what was by the side. We put our own blinkers on. And yes, I've got, whilst I have a pretty wide scope for my attention in my work, I can't see what I can't see. And that's where it does cost me the space to be able to just sit back. And as I say, a good holiday is one where by the end of the holiday, you start thinking things you couldn't have imagined at the beginning of the holiday. And I haven't had that kind of holiday for far too long.
I noticed a lot more people in my business going on 10-day silent retreats, and I think that there's a real hunger out there for the blank space, the self space. And then there's one other thing that I have left over here, which is that it seems to me that employers are not creating enough space for the attention mode of exploring or regenerating. To some extent, you're talking about regenerating, which is that one of the things that your job costs you is regeneration. That makes a lot of sense. But also, there's so much time is structured and purpose-driven inside businesses that there's not that much time to move laterally.
All of us, we need breadth as well as depth, and it's back in the 80s. In fact, we were talking about the T-shaped manager. We've got breadth and you've got depth. And so now there is that breadth, of course, is in things like just having context for your work and your domain and business and society and so on. But the exploring is something which we don't have the space for and we need to create. And that where it is literally, there is no purpose other than I find this interesting and this is beyond my normal scope. And this might lead to something else which is beyond that. And so our world of always more for less and greater efficiency means that we have been taking away from that ability to explore. And in that exploration, we will often find things that are unanticipated, but add an extraordinary value to our work and our capacities.
That's super interesting. I think it's an incredible lens on how to think about some of the problems of work, is to think of them as information and information handling challenges. And so much of the interface between, especially for those of us in the knowledge business, so much of the interface between us and our work is this screen, It is a competition for attention. So I really appreciate you coming on the show today. And I would love to let people know where they can learn more about you and more about your work.
Well, the real focus right now is on thriving on overload. So thrivingonoverload.com. So try to build that as a real resource center. So as information on the book. You also have a online course. Well, it's an interactive course, which takes people through the process of building their own personal information plan. So that's something which is relevant to individuals and absolutely working with a number of organizations. So to help their people in the organization to develop their information capabilities. We have my own podcast, Thriving Overload, talking to fascinating people, what I call information masters, and a whole set of other resources. So Thriving Overload is a great place. And there's also just more general work on information on my work at rossdawson.com.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
It's been a real pleasure, Dart.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Work for Humans. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. And share the show with one person you think would get value from it. Believe it or not, this really helps us grow the show and reach more people who want to build the kind of work that people really want. As always, thank you to my producer, Jason Ames at Ninth Path Audio, for his insights into content and his high standard for quality. Final note, the opinions shared here are my own and not the views of Google or Cisco Systems. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.